This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
Anna believes in the intersection of personal and collective healing. As you heal, grow, and unfold your gifts, you are caring for your communities and our world. And as we witness and participate in collective healing, we are helping cultivate an environment where healing is easier for all of us. Valeria interviews Anna Andahasi Salazar. She is a dancer, artist, yoga guide, and licensed mental health care provider. Her private practice, Sandstone Healing Arts, specializes in dance movement therapy for the treatment of trauma. Anna is a multicultural and multiethnic descendant of the Hungarian Diaspora. She works through the premise that personal and collective healing are interwoven and that authentic relationship to self, others, and nature provide the supportive foundation for the heart of personal and social change. Meet Anna at sandstonehealingarts.com. Here's the interview with Anna Andahasi Salazar.
In your own words, who is Anna Andahasi Salazar?
Hi, Valeria. Thank you. Yes, despite being told you asked that question, I wasn't initially prepared, but I think that what comes to me first as far as my own words are kind of the words of a name itself, or words that are given to me before I can speak. And the most recent name is Salazar, is my married name. And so that invokes a strong Mexican lineage. My family of origin last name is Andahasi, and so that invokes my Magyar, or my Hungarian lineage and ancestors. I have 3 other names, and each of them carry meaning that kind of unfolds through time and reveals to me different parts of who I am in relationship to ancestry, how I embody who I am today and the future. My given name, Anna, is a Hungarian derivative of a Sanskrit word meaning earth or food or body. For yoga practitioners, the Annamaya Kosha, or the layer of our being that is our body. And so it's no surprise, perhaps, that I became a body-centered therapist and working with the level of the body, this dense physical manifestation of energy. My other name is Adeodatta, which means gift from God. My ego, I'm sure, would love it if that meant that I, was some embodied divine gift. But what I've learned of this name is that I feel that the calling or the path of my work and what I do is to help usher in the divine gifts of others. And I make reference to that in a lot of my writing. And then my other name, Agnes, is a family Hungarian name as well. And that has some different translations as far as purity. And I'm still growing into and learning this name. I think it has something to do with spiritual energy, kind of collective healing that I think I will continue to learn from as I grow. So that's me in the words that have been given to me as far as my name.
Wow. I'm listening to you, and there's so much there. Amazing words. So words have power, per se. There's something about words, and that's very much true. For some reason, I was never kind of attracted or guided to look into the meaning of words, like my name that was given to me and all that. And I just interviewed somebody recently about archetypes. And yeah, she's a therapist too. And amazing. I mean, I have learned so much. In listening to you now, it reminded me of her. And then another person that I also interviewed about healing ancestral lineage, I guess the name it was, her work. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of power, as I said, in a sense of expression. And I wonder why I was never really guided to explore this realm. So talk to me for a moment about the connection between the words, like the names that are given to us, and even the DNA, the biology of being. And then what's the connection with those two aspects of being, and then the spiritual, the divine part of us? How did they all intersect? How did they all connect, Anna, in a way?
I would love if I really knew the answer
Yes.
to that question.
Right.
It's like living and just learning as I live. It always unfolds. But what comes to my mind first is a story of growing up in the United States. My mother is an immigrant. She was a refugee from Hungary who grew up in Sweden, but raised me in the United States with my siblings. And so there was a lot of different multicultural influences and different relationship with the land beneath us from my father's side, and relationship with land overseas from both my mother and father's side. And so I remember learning a lot about individualism, maybe not that word, so to speak, but certainly the cultural values of individualism were coming through in this American education. And I remember being struck by this difference between home and school, and I was trying to assert some individual original type of energy.
Yes.
And it was so funny because my mother would repeatedly tell me that my mannerisms, my body movements, my facial expressions, even my voice tone would at certain times appear to be exactly like distant relatives who'd passed on or I had never met. And I remember being struck by a disappointment as a kid trying to acculturate and assimilate in America of like, what? Like, I'm just this carbon copy of all of these other people. There's nothing original about me.
Yes. Yeah.
And yet I have grown into feeling the presence of people who know me, but who I don't know, through just being in a body that comes from a lineage and comes from a mixture of lineages who all have their relationship with each other before my very small existence of Anna, ever came into being. And so with that, I think that there's a deep intersection with the trauma healing and somatic psychotherapy work I do of allowing someone's body to tell a story that's a lot deeper than our individual life or psyche can hold. And if we listen to that story and open up to it, we're often transported or carried into a place of spirituality, meaning whatever that could mean to someone, but what is beyond our conscious kind of linear understanding, our narrative memory, we say in more neuroscientific terms, the things that we are aware of that we remember. But then when we start to embody things that we remember on a body level, it can open up a whole new ground of being or sensing who we are in the world.
Yes, that resonates. You see, I just mentioned before about not being guided, kind of look into it, study and all that. I'm a student of Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, which is non-duality. Oh, you know, right? It's a Hindu philosophy. So, and it's very intellectual. So all the practices is not really something that is accessed through the body. I mean, it's with the body, but not through the body, not doing anything with the body. It's not yoga. Yeah, I kept asking that question. Why I'm not into the knowledge, spiritual knowledge. It felt like music to me. It just calms everything, the mind and body. It kind of, they rest within that realm, that reality that feels very real to me. For some people, might sound abstract, but it's very real. So even though somebody like myself, Anna, I was just wondering, because I have done some work. You probably heard about biodanza. It's a movement. It's kind of dance, but it's biodance, biological dance.
Biodance.
Yeah,
like
biodance. Yeah, biodanza, actually, they call it. It's it started in Chile. So I did that one time, and I noticed the body doing things that I never thought it would. I mean, I couldn't interpret. I could not understand, really. I was just so surprised how much information it holds. But when it comes to trauma, like in my case, I've been traumatized as a child, and then I could not trust my body, what it was instructing me to do. A lot of times, the body instructing the mind to do was around unsafe people, because they reminded me of my parents. So I was always kind of being attracted to unsafe individuals. So talk to me for a moment about that, how trauma has affected the brain, and how do we learn to trust the body, the information in the body?
Oh, yeah. I loved what you said about from your own lived experience, that through trauma, you connect that with really not feeling that you could trust what your body was telling you to do.
Right.
And there's just so much to hold, I think, in that statement, that our body actually gives us instructions.
Yes, yes, it does.
And that when it comes to trauma, there's a confusion in the sequence and the flow. And many past work on trauma really came out of various fields, but particularly military trauma, car accidents, big events that seem to kind of glitch or get stuck in somebody's body and mind. The field of trauma and trauma therapy has evolved and continues to evolve rapidly. And so people sometimes hear this term like small t trauma versus big T. And so I just want to kind of touch into some of that a little bit, because I think some of those terms can be a little bit misleading, in the sense that if we have repeated experiences, no matter how big or subtle they seem, they can have a deeply impacting impression on our body, mind, and how we interact with our senses and our sense of ourself. And so when I speak of trauma, I'm integrating both of those oversimplified sides of things that major events we may have experienced, but also really subtle, repeated experiences. And many of us have combination of those. And so wanting to be able to speak on that first. And I am very much informed by neuroscience, and that while trauma is, considered a mental illness, it is so much a condition of our nervous system, and the relationship between what we're sensing from our body and what we're perceiving in our thinking or awareness centers of our brain. And so if my body remembers something, it will give me a signal as to whether this is familiar or whether it's unfamiliar. And I'm using those terms because safety and danger get confused here when it comes to our body. That often, if we've experienced something repeatedly, even if our mind does not like the idea, if we've experienced something repeatedly, there's a familiarity to the physical level. And so we may actually get safety signals to our brain from our body. And so we get into this realm of complexity of why can't I trust what my body is telling me? Well, if I experience something quite dangerous but repeatedly, if I encounter it later in life, my body might say, this is safe on some level, give me signals of safety or openness or going towards something, while my brain is telling me, this is dangerous, go away, and vice versa. And so I'm really oversimplifying it here. But I also like to open up the understanding that if our body remembers something, it will respond whether or not our thinking brain has a recollection. And so usually this takes various directions with people, in the sense of shutting down the voice of the body. And this can be conscious or unconscious, where we've learned, okay, I can't actually trust what my body's giving me. And so I'm just going to shut the whole thing down. And other times being completely overtaken by what the information the body is giving without any reference anymore to the present moment, kind of like being taken over by a tidal wave of emotional or physical sensations. And so those are just some kind of broad strokes. Can go into more depth if there's further questions about that or particular parts of the brain. But I do appreciate what you said about this loss of ability to trust your body.
That was exactly the case, yes, with me. Maybe that's the reason I felt safe going intellectual, kind of trusting the intellect in what I could learn, I could observe and absorb. So that what I could understand, really, that really felt like a safe place for me. And as I talked to you off record, and that's probably the reason I do this. That's why the reason I always, every time I meet somebody, I have a tendency of asking them deep questions and get into deep conversations and not really kind of entertaining small ones. So I kind of get bored or just kind of, I'm not interested. And maybe because that makes me feel safe. Okay, if I know what your belief systems are, and because I trust more that than the body itself. So let me see how this person operates, from their intellect, from the knowledge that they have of themselves and the world. So it's interesting to see, Anna, how trauma, yes, affects everything. It certainly changed the brain. I have heard it that way. So I guess I have a question for you that I was recently exposed to from one of my guests that I didn't interview yet. I have his book and we talked by email, but I didn't talk to him yet. He experienced severe trauma. He saw his mother being killed by his father. So, and then he's a psychologist these days. That was many years ago. So he was just, the word is confusion, chaos. He just was very self-destructive too. He made a lot of bad choices. He sees it that way, but he raises the question. And the question that I will ask you now is this, a question that he asks. Are we in control as we are being traumatized? That's the first question. And then when the trauma cycle results in people becoming violent and abusive later in life, are they fully in control of their choices and decisions? So speaking of control, right, that we can. So I would love to hear from your perspective.
Yeah. In my work, I'm always going to preface it with that, because I always feel when I'm asked questions that because of the power dynamic of being a healthcare provider and a licensed therapist, there can be like an unusual amount of weight of truth that gets placed on what you say.
Yeah,
And
yes.
so to speak to power right away and just
Yeah.
like really bring it into to my experience,
Yeah. Yeah.
that with my clients and in my work, I actually speak extensively about power dynamics and trauma. And in a sense, most of the folks I work with, and have worked with over the last 20 years in my career in health and human services, is that trauma tends to be a result because of some type of an abuse or a loss of power, um, and and that essentially on a neurological level, we are more prone to trauma if our body is experiencing fear. It's sending a lot of fear signals, and then it is mobilizing the body to freeze first of all and take in more information. And if we perceive there's danger, or it's so dangerous we don't have time to freeze, then we flight, we go into a sympathetic arousal and we try to run. And if we are unable to run, we will turn and fight. And by the way, this is not linear and sequence for people, for individual bodies, for many reasons, but I'm just speaking to kind of the most basic here. And that if we turn and fight, ideally, we can run or fight and actually use that energy of incredible fear, or as I would say, like a projection to safety. And if it delivers us to safety, we can actually kind of shake it off and hopefully facilitate a return to a felt sense of safety. And this is an incredibly powerful somatic, physiological, just brainstem level instinct to survive. So we're down to the cellular level of survival. And if I am unable to escape or fight off something dangerous, I will stay in a frozen state, perhaps, or I will actually dissociate into a collapsed state. And it is in those situations in particular that the power in our own body to run or to fight is actually stifled and in a sense kind of shoved back into our tissues. And so that is, in a sense, we're suddenly powerless on the outside, but then also powerless on the inside to the own power of our physiology, which has nowhere to go. And so I would, want to just kind of start there, if any listeners have not heard trauma talked about in that way, because when we have trauma stored in our bodies, it's a very, very powerful, dense energy usually. And when it comes to living with that held inside,
Yeah.
that
Tell
can
me about
be,
it.
yeah,
Yes.
pardon?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I know what that is. I have an idea. Sadly.
All right. Yes, and you had asked me about, you know, this question about what is it about the trauma cycle and somehow a result of people becoming violent or abusive later in life. And I by and large tend to work with survivors of abuse, and yet I also work with folks who have done actions that they deeply regret or have remorse or feel that they are about to do something harmful. Um, and was going to name that the research and the data on this is out of my scope, but in conversation with colleagues and psychiatrists and clinical psychologists who are called in to testify in court or make predictions on people's behavior, have a really difficult time doing this. Humans are beautiful animals. we
Yes.
we are amazing creative organisms, and
Mm.
there are ways to understand us and there are ways to guess, but there really isn't a way to know. And most of the uh, data, so to speak, is that we tend to be uh, more likely to probably have health issues of various systems of our mind body um, if we have survived trauma than we are to become perpetrators of harm for others. Um, and so just to name that, I think that it can be tricky to assume that I wouldn't want anyone to assume that the more trauma we have, somehow the more prone we would be to violence and abuse of others. I just don't think that that's true. And yet, some of the things I said before, I think apply to this, in that if I have been treated with a lot of violence, um, and especially if it has been in the context of what would otherwise be like an affectionate or caring relationship, this is something that's extremely confusing for the nervous system. And so people's uh, accultured bodies will respond in all kinds of different ways to navigate that. And without support and restoration of some type of safety, felt sense, internal, external, it's very possible or believable that there's an impulse to repeat what has happened to us. And that is not so simple to talk about in kind of a cognitive way. When we're here talking with words and ideas, we're up in our prefrontal cortex and we think, okay, that situation A happened, so then situation A happens again 2 decades later. Oh, that's connected. But really, when we're talking about trauma and what body holds, it's on this midbrain level. We call it the limbic system, in the middle part of the brain. And the repetition tends to be more of something that has the power to repeat kind of a state in the body. It's an emotional or a physiological state. And so an actual repetition is often more on a felt sense level than it is on an external level. And so I think that this gets into a very deep place of how individual people navigate living with trauma or healing through trauma, or avoiding it. Or avoiding it. And I often talk to clients about that many of the symptoms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, are kind of an unconscious or semi-conscious or sometimes very intentional way to avoid the trauma that is stored in our body. And so you had asked much earlier about, how do you work through this? And it's often slowly starting to pulse in and out of relationship with the felt sense of the body, because most of our symptoms, whether we're acting them out on other people in relationships, whether it's with ourselves or with behaviors or even thought patterns or emotional states that we repeat over and over. A lot of the symptoms that people come to therapy or somatic therapy for to heal from are repeated unconscious attempts to protect from wounding and from the embodied memory of wounding. And so when we can actually slowly start to touch the wound, so to speak, the body is amazing in knowing what to do. It really knows what to do. And I share with people a lot what I call the psychic immunity, because uh, often people know that there's an immune system in the physical body. And a lot of medicine works to enhance the immune system so that it can take care and fight off viruses or heal wounds. And as a somatic therapist, I really feel into this kind of what feels almost tangible to me, even though it's not so physical, is this palpable sense of this mind-body connection of that there's a energetic immunity that can be activated with people. And that if there's a psychological wound and we can increase the kind of wellness aspect or as you brought in spiritual,
Yeah.
or like an energetic
Mm.
immunity, the psychic
Yeah.
immune system, it can actually attend to a wound much in the same way that the physical immune system attends to a physical wound.
Right.
And so there's lots of jargon and science and theory and best practices and techniques and all kinds of amazing things to geek out on the rest of your life. And when sitting with the process, it's very much kind of a miraculous spiritual thing to witness an innate energetic healing mechanism actually heal one's own wound.
Yes. Wow. It's amazing to hear that. I mean, you said so much there. I love the concept, the idea of energetic immunity. And even you said spiritual, which resonates with me, that idea. Which to me, they are the same, actually, energetic, spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, right. So there's so much we don't know, say, objectively, we can't really pin down and know exactly how it works, but it's so evident. That you have seen, of course, with your clients. I have seen with my own body, these things happening, my own body, mind. And I love the way you talked about, you mentioned earlier in this conversation about trauma being seen as a mental illness, but then you said it's really a condition of the nervous system, this regulation of that, I mean, with my own words. So that really resonates true as well, right? I remember to this day, actually, it still happens. It doesn't overwhelm me anymore, but it's still there. When anyone, especially my husband, he gets upset and I see kind of anger or the expression of that emotion, then something in me gets triggered. The body becomes hot and it tries to reject that expression, that kind of emotion. And now I know why, because my mother was like that. She would get very angry and she would beat me. She would be very, very violent. So I think that's the body. How interesting, Anna. Yeah, the body kind of trying to protect itself. Okay, he's getting angry. He could beat you. That could happen.
Exactly.
How interesting, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And when you're and right back in with this, there's this experience is embedded in power dynamics, some of which may not be the same now as it was then.
Right.
And so this is where what the way your body learned to prepare and anticipate and protect you as a child, it will continue to give you the exact same instructions later
Ah,
in life unless updated.
yes, right. Let's update it.
Unless
Ah,
updated. And so I think that
yes.
I this is often
Uh-huh.
confusing for trauma survivors in that they can be in a situation and their body is really giving them signals and they respond a particular way, and then maybe a day or later they look back on it and they're like, I wish I would have said this or done that, and they're accessing their kind of adult embodied ego state if they were perhaps maybe triggered into more of a child state in the situation. So it's a pretty nuanced but deep invitation
Mm,
to connect with one's body and actually
mm,
attend to our body.
yes.
And that you mentioned the heat. So with
Yes.
somatic healing, we would go right to the heat. We would
Yes.
go right to the heat and
Okay.
allow the heat to actually speak, whether that's through movement, through sometimes the sensation in the body gives images to the person feeling the sensation. Occasionally, I was in sitting with someone else, I'll get some strong images that seem like they belong to the collective space between us. And sometimes the body will ask for movement or care in some way. Um, and and if we're able to attend to the sensation in that way, our body knows that we are safe enough and that it has a chance to actually release what it's been holding. Because I often give the example that if I'm being chased by a predator, I would not ever have the neurological capability to like stop and smell a rose,
Yes.
say,
Yes.
or
Right.
stop and be like, oh, I think that my
Mm,
left shoulder itches. If I'm
mm,
running from a predator, I am running
mm,
from the predator and my brainstem has taken over.
mm.
There's not a lot of access to
Right.
curiosity
So true.
and fear. I learned in
Mhm.
graduate school in our neuroscience class. I loved this
Mhm.
line. The professor said, uh,
Mhm.
fear and curiosity can't coexist in the nervous system at the same time.
So true.
And so that is a guiding factor, that if I'm feeling this sensation and if I'm in a present moment and have awareness enough of my present moment that I'm safe enough to go in and feel that sensation, I've already changed the power dynamic internally.
Wow. This is a very insightful message for all of us, especially trauma survivors, right? Which I never thought of myself in that way, but interesting hearing that now. Huh. Trauma survivor. I love the idea of being a trauma thriver.
Yes, yes, and that really is the place to go of like, wow, then once we
Huh.
learn that we can have sunlight and water and space, then who do we become? I'm sitting here by some potted plants, and I they are often my therapy partners
Ah,
with clients
yes.
because they teach
Yes.
so much about surviving if they're in an environment of deprivation. And yet once they can learn to tolerate nourishment, they start to tell a full story of expression and thriving. And so we get to learn from all of these other life forms, animals and elements and plants, about what not just surviving looks like, but what thriving can hold for us.
Yes. I love your connection to nature. I have read about you and I looked at the website and I see some of the pictures in you in nature. It's almost like there's no separation looking at you and the rocks and the forests. Just there's no, that's how I see humans. We are not separate from nature. We are nature.
Yes, we are. Yeah, and I always remind myself and others in who come to me in this process that um, my my theoretical orientation, so to speak, or my biases are out in the open, which is that we are part of the natural world, and that even though we cannot, not all of us can see a physical mass of our emotions and our psyche, our mind. My sense and the way I work with it and the way that I witness it responding quickly and beautifully is to understand that the emotions and the psyche are also part of nature, and
Mm.
therefore follow the same sort of divine natural law. And if we just partner with that and trust it, it can lead us quickly down paths we never would have thought up.
Mm, so true. And isn't it one of those laws? Assume, I would just bring this up here. Would that be the idea of flow, the idea of surrender? Would that be part of it? Because I see a lot of times when the body mind tries to reject, push away anything, it just becomes so much more difficult and challenging. There's this energy of rejection, of not accepting something, that it is happening in the moment. So talk to me for a moment about that. I don't know if that's part of that law, but when I see flowers, when I see nature, it just becomes what it's meant to become. They are not saying no to what they are meant to be here or their expression in this reality. So they just kind of beautifully become what they are, basically what they are. But humans, we tend to push away a lot of what our natural wisdom kind of guides us to do or to express in here. Isn't it interesting? Yeah, I'd love to hear from you, your insights on that too,
Yeah.
Anna.
And speaking of nature, as soon as you brought in the word flow, I of course was filled with images of water
Ah,
and and
yes.
and water flowing and
Mm,
and
yeah.
one of my first teachers of healing was the Kinnickinnic River in present day Wisconsin. Kinnickinnic being a Dakota word for red willow bark or even tobacco, sometimes used interchangeably. But this river, I would walk this river as a young child and up through until like my 20s whenever I was in the area, and I learned so much from watching this river season after season, year after year, because it would change the land. And as it changed the land, the river would change its shape, it would change its
Mm,
sound. And as
mm,
it did that, all of the other animals changed around it,
mm,
and the bend would
mm,
change, the sound. And
mm,
then sitting by it, I would notice my own changes and places that, yes,
mm.
there were rocks in the way or a fallen tree.
Yes.
and these different
Yeah.
kind of
Uh,
blocks that come in through storms or through a dying and decay process. And so I'm struck by the image of water, and what you said about surrender and allowing a flow, and allowing our life force, so to speak, to sort of carry us or guide us. And that can be a deeply spiritual and healing process. It will also be the process that brings us to the next blockade if there is one.
yes.
And so
Yes.
I often
Yes.
write about or talk about
Mm,
um, actually letting the healing process lead us to where it needs to go, and that the work for trauma therapy especially is to open up the places of blocks enough that it doesn't flood an area so quickly, uh, but also enough that it can start to relieve where there is stagnation, and that when we're allowed to actually regulate the flow of some through a place that was once stuck, we have the chance to irrigate whatever comes next. And so there's often this uh, path, which is of trauma healing, or really healing, which implies that there is something that needs to heal, which is a little bit in partnership with the surrender and the flow, which, if for many trauma survivors, that can be absolutely terrifying to think, I
Yes.
will go into my body and let
Right.
whatever I'm feeling here carry me somewhere, and then like,
Yes. Right.
absolutely not.
Yes.
There can be a lot of fear with that.
Yes.
And so what I often help use as this metaphor for this flow is just as I mentioned with the plants, that if the plants before us have no water, they won't grow, or they will produce very little
Yeah.
fruit.
Right.
And
Right.
yet, if they have too much water, they also might not
Right.
produce the
Right.
fruit or
Mm.
grow or be
Mm.
able to survive and reproduce. And
Yes.
so
Mm.
I'm often listening with someone, and their loves, their passions, their curiosities, what brings them joy, and where they really long for this water of life to flow, so to speak. And then we irrigate channels in their lives in that way, and as much as we can feel it on the body level before the water even starts to flow. And then we come back to this site of wounding or pain or stuckness, and we slowly start to allow water to actually permeate and flow through. And then we've already created channels for it to flow into, and that is a lot more of a trusting process for someone in their own body. I had written, you mentioned my website, and I had written a little bit there, and also on my social media about sandstone, and I called my practice sandstone healing arts. And it is a stone that can actually keep its form but become fully permeated with water. And so, in a sense, it's a guide too for how we want to let the water of emotion flow through us. And yet we also want to have some integrity and some structure and some deep trust in our ability to withstand that flow, because the the power of trauma or stuck emotion in the body is incredibly strong. And so there's good intuitive reason why people fear it, and why I respect it highly.
Mm. Yes. Yeah. Wow. I love everything you said. Everything you say is just fused and not just sounds. It fused so wise. It's coming from that place of course, learned wisdom, which you're very much in touch with that in a very practical sense, but also your innate wisdom comes out in your presence. It's just very beautiful. As I said off record, even before meeting you, it was already there. Like, oh my God, it feels so good to even think of you. It's interesting. It's almost like you have embodied a lot of what you have been saying, in the way you express in the things, everything you're expressing through words. It's very much present at that energetic level. How wonderful to see. So I love the water of life, the way you speak of water. And then I love when you say, okay, a plant, then if you don't give enough water, then it won't flourish. And then if you give too much water, so too much water, too little water. So it goes back to the idea of balance, isn't it?
Yes.
Everything is already imbalanced, or it's searching for balance. So maybe that's what, when you talk about the body's wisdom, that's because it is very much part of this realm here, natural world. So it's always searching for healing, which is associated to balance and harmony, as nature would do, as plants would do. But the most amazing thing also about that is that we see the collective healing. And you speak of that, the article you sent to me, which was very academic, as you said that to me. So true. Yes, I couldn't really get to understand much of it, but I know the conclusion was very interesting. It says the body and culture are always present and participating. Individual bodies and collective social groups are the sites of trauma and therefore need to be approached as the sites of healing and resiliency. Of course, there's a lot more that was said there. So I guess it's a good time we're almost at the end, but I would love to hear from you more about this concept, this idea of individual and collective, body collective healing.
Oh, we need a podcast part two.
That's true. Yes, that is true.
And they are all, this is all so interconnected, and we spoke a bit about ancestry and DNA and violence and abuse and power dynamics, and so it really all comes together. I am an engaged therapist and artist, and also work in community groups, mutual aid. And so I'm present in my community in ways other than just my professional role and then disappear, as a licensed provider. But the article I wrote and published in the Body Movement and Dance and Psychotherapy Journal was about vicarious trauma. So this is a condition under which somebody develops maybe post-traumatic stress disorder or similar symptoms by virtue of being exposed to someone else's trauma, and in particular as a therapist who works intimately with possibly the details of of others' trauma. And whether the details are exposed or not, we are intimately working with the embodiment of the trauma and trying to renegotiate it. And one of the main points that you brought up here is this intersection of the collective and the personal and the cultural. And practicing psychotherapy means working across multiple intersections of difference. We have different socioeconomic backgrounds. I've got role power. Someone's coming in as a client, but they may have lots more power in society than me for different reasons. There's intersections of race and gender and ethnicity and immigration and all kinds of access and lack of access to resources. And so one of the main things I think I'll speak to in this moment is that I work with a lot of activists and caregivers and healers who are trauma survivors themselves, and feel called and have a calling to heal themselves. If they're trusting that flow of the healing work in their own lives, it inevitably brings them into, as we talked about, maybe a barrier or a place of wounding in themselves. And one of the most common things that I actually hear from people, whether it is spoken verbally or ends up getting navigated kind of non-verbally or somatically in the body, is that people who are very attuned to the suffering of others tend to have received some socialization that shuts down their energy in the sense of holding back getting any help or resources or healing themselves, as if that would allow others more energy. And this is something that I come to again and again, which is that when when we're working in realms of activism and social justice, and we might be exposed to um, massive violence, institutional violence, and I want to refer to that again because of what I mentioned earlier about trauma being an abuse of power or the inability to actually use our fight or flight response to get us to safety. And so, in situations of social oppression, with or without um, overt violence on social groups, if there's an oppression and a marginalization, the body will likely store that as trauma because there is no power outlet for it to go, or it's the back pressure from social dynamics is pushing that back, and that happens on the individual body level. We feel that, and we're either going to dissociate from it, try to disconnect from the body, or it's going to go somewhere, or it's going to stay lodged in. And and so, particularly from my, I have lots to say around that too, but from my particular individual provider vantage point, and working not just as an activist and in the community, but also as a therapist helping folks who are activists in the community. There's a common feeling that people come in and say, "Oh, well, this person or this neighbor or this group of people or this have it so much harder. Why should I be working on this maybe very personal trauma that they have?"
Yeah. Mm.
And the metaphor, I like to work with metaphor, and
Yeah.
and as you said,
Yeah.
with we've got water and plants, and I
Yes.
also invoke the body and the wisdom of the nature of the body, because I say, okay, well, imagine this. Imagine that there's a cell in
Yeah.
my left shoulder
Mm.
that is really hurt.
Mm.
And imagine that it says, well, I'm not going to, heal myself because I'm aware that there's a cell down in my right knee
Mm.
that I think has it even worse.
Yes.
and then I
Yeah.
and then we kind of sit with that for a moment.
Uh-huh.
And because the chances of the cell in the shoulder helping the knee by not helping itself is actually really unlikely. Now, I'm not speaking as a biochemist or a medical provider here, so I really am invoking this purely as a therapeutic metaphor, but that the chances of me being in a cell in a body and helping a cell farther away who I can't reach, the chances of that actually greatly increase if I work on the health of my own cell. And and if I work on my own health and wellness, I am then emitting a frequency into the larger body. And and that actually will be much better at at the larger system of being able to put resources where it's needed. And it's just a very, I get curious about all of the multiple origins that comes from. But one of the things I think about a lot is that it's often the people who are very sensitive, um, who have internalized a lot of messages about how little power they have. And um, and so that to me seems like a larger systemic force just shutting down individual healing. and so and so I really sense these palpably as together, that as somebody works on their individual healing, not only are we going to be more responsive actually and have more energy to respond to the needs of others, but we're also less likely to replay that, um, and possibly, as this repetition compulsion comes in, actually replay that uh, in external ways is our relationships. If I've experienced an abuse of power, if I believe that I should just save other people, then I might actually start to abuse my power trying to save other people and then hurt people along the way rather than
Yes.
actually being able to
Yeah.
attend to that
Yes.
and that
Mm.
energy and really show up in a way that is actually helpful and responsive to the
Mm.
outside environment too. So
Wow.
I could probably go on and
Uh,
on and on about
wow.
this, but I think that there's a risk um, in in psychotherapy of being too much on the individual, and that needs to be balanced with understanding that the way that we heal a personal trauma might be incredibly cultural or collective in its approach too. Um, and that also those of us who work in social justice or community activist realms could benefit from looking at the individual as well. And so there being a differentiation between these two, but a deep linkage, just as we see in a physical body, or we talk about this in neuroscience, there's differentiation between different parts of the brain or the nervous system, but then linkage. They're separate but together. They're separate but also kind of one and the same. And I think this is deeply important when it comes to healing on this individual level, and also the collective. It goes back and forth in my group therapy. I often tell clients at the end of a group therapy experience, and I say it very genuinely because I mean it, and I have the embodied feeling of this. I say, thank you for bringing more healing into our world, because that is what they're doing. And they are not, that does not just benefit you, the individual. It actually benefits everyone you come in contact with.
Wow. Yes, you do have. I mean, this is a very important message and I mean, extremely insightful for all of us. We tend to forget that sometimes, right? Especially highly sensitive people, empathetic. We just
Mm-hmm.
take other people's suffering and then we go with that first. I guess
Mm-hmm.
you reminded me of peace activists that was funny to see that they actually trying to bring this idea, this concept of peace for the world, but in a very, let's say, conflicted way. They
Yeah.
don't seem to be
Uh-huh.
peace for themselves. So that it never made sense to me. It kind of
Mm-hmm.
never resonated,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. So yeah, everything is interconnected. That's one of the insights that I have gained into looking, not just into my own personal, actually by taking care of my personal healing, it kind of brought me into this more universal truth of interconnectedness. So the more personal I become, I go, the deeper I go personally into healing, spirituality, whatever, exploration, curiosity, I just kind of find this larger kind of universal truth. It's incredible. So what a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful, of course, in the other way around, because it's not linear anyway, but I mean, your message, everything you do, you are doing, your expression, this reality, it's so beautiful and very much needed. And I mean, starting with the conversation, you've been open to listen to this, just listening, and then kind of reflecting, and then little by little, baby steps, putting all this into practice. I know it's not something that happens overnight, and there's no rush, right, Anna, when it comes to these processes. But we need to get started. And I think it is happening. I have seen myself even like just observing the body and the mind and what they're doing. It's just, it amazes me. Like, I think the other day somebody said, I listened to some of your interviews like 5 years ago and 3 years ago. And you feel so much more authentic. There's something about you that changed. And I had not realized that. I was just it feels like it's happening, but it's not something that I was keeping track or writing it down. So it's amazing to see nature taking care of itself. And that's
yes,
right.
yes. And the power of witnessing. You're being witnessed.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
seen, and
It's fun.
just like we talked, the power of nature, and how this I witnessed this river change, and it also witnessed me change. And without that relationship, we kind of lose our bearings. And so it really is a pretty beautiful thing to be in authentic relationship with yourself and your own process, and that has a deep effect and a palpable effect on everyone you speak with.
Yes, Anna. Oh, yes, a billion times. I usually say that, because I can say a trillion times, but then I don't even know how to pronounce the other one. But it's just like infinite, the yes to that comes from within. Yes. Authenticity in a sense of being true to what is true. I always go back to that. What is true here? What's present? Somebody defined recently, I just heard a definition of trauma, and somebody said trauma is the inability to be in the present, to be present. And that resonated true to me as well. Like, coming from trauma, I was like, oh yeah, I used to be very much either in the past or future, depressed or anxious. And of course, all of that didn't go away, didn't disappear. It's still there, here. And I feel it sometimes, but it's just so different now. Being able to notice, as you said, like to become aware of, those, the mental dynamics and the energy in the body just flowing. It's incredible to become the witness to, although you don't want to experience this from that perspective only. It's beautiful to engage too, right, Anna, to just embody all that and just, it's okay to just feel. I have actually another platform that's a video interview platform that I titled The Freedom to Feel. I guess it was
beautiful.
Yeah, related to my own processes and where I was. So we're almost at the end. I want to thank you again for your beautiful presence. I know that we could talk for hours, ages, actually, I would say. That would be amazing. I want to mention another article that you sent to me that was published in 2016 on high frequency yoga breathing. That was by Spirituality Studies. So that was a very interesting one too. And I highlighted something here that caught my attention, where you wrote, breathing bridges conscious and unconscious functions. So I stopped there because it seemed like something in me understood that. Like, yeah, that's true. Wow. We could talk about this. It would be amazing for you to come back. I would love for you to come back here at some point.
I would love that. We could do a whole conversation just on breath.
Yes, Anna. Yes. Please come back. And then I want to mention the types of therapy that you offer: dance movement therapy, EMDR, expressive arts, humanistic, multicultural, psychodynamic, somatic, trauma focused. Did I miss something, Anna?
That's a pretty good list.
And then at the end, I'll ask you a question. But before that, would you like to add or say anything that you left unsaid for this conversation?
Well, we brought in the breath, and so I think I just want to be able to invoke that power of the breath. It is a deeply integrative experience to be breathing constantly and unconsciously. There's a continuous impulse toward life and balance that our body is showing us every single breath cycle. There is a birth and a growth and a peak, and then a dying and a dissipation and a death, and then there's the rebirth into the next breath. And this is always there until we stop breathing. And it is deeply biological, but also spiritual. And the article you mentioned at the end was a very scientific, technical
Oh,
article, but
yes.
but it but it comes from a really, really deeply embodied spirituality as a lifelong student and practitioner of yoga. And so what we have as this instinctual voice, ever flowing wise voice of the breath, coming from our body constantly, it really is available to us in every single moment that we choose to pay attention. And there's probably millions, if not billions, of YouTube and apps and all kinds of things to have a guided breathing meditation or practice or something like this. And yet it is incredibly simple, but also very difficult for our mind to find the breath that important. And so I just invite people, especially if anyone's listening who is in the midst of trauma healing or struggling with that, to find a way to get curious about your breath and find a way to get curious about how the inhale is felt and how the exhale is felt. And one of the most potent practices we can do is a breath awareness. And eventually, with time and enough attention as sunlight and water to plants, with enough attention, our body will usually just show us that it is caring for us, and our mind can start to rest in the trust of just being breathed by the body.
Wow, what a beautiful invitation. A very inspiring one, profound, inspiring, all-inclusive, right? It's not leaving anything. Thank you so much again, Anna. Gosh,
Thank you.
Thank you for your beautiful presence, for the timeless wisdom in everything that you are here expressing in this reality, all the contribution you're making. Thank you again. And we'll talk again soon. I would love to have you back. But I wanted to also mention the website. So before we say goodbye,
Yes.
The website is sandstonehealingsarts.com. So I will have actually on the podcast profile, it will be there. Are you on social media as well, on any other?
I am, yes. Instagram and Facebook under Sandstone Healing Arts. And then I'm on LinkedIn, and you'll find me under my name. I do have a Sandstone Healing Arts page as well, but people can find me on there under Ana Andahasi Salazar. My Instagram handle is sandstone_healing arts.
So that's wonderful to know. So I'll have all of those handles, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, as well the website on your podcast profile. Thank you so much again for your presence, and we'll talk soon. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Ana Andahasi Salazar and her work, please visit sandstonehealingarts.com.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.